The desert stretched endlessly under a pale red sky. The air shimmered with heat, but the ground was cracked, dry, and lifeless. Sandstorms had carved strange shapes into the stones, and every gust of wind carried dust sharp enough to cut bare skin. It was not a place for humans, nor for anyone who valued their life. Yet a lone human walked through it, his boots heavy with dust, his breath ragged under the mask he wore to filter the air. He was searching. His mission was not glory or riches, just survival. His ship had crashed days ago, torn apart by enemy fire, and he was stranded in this wasteland. Supplies were running low, water almost gone. Every step felt heavier than the last. But then, he froze. In the silence of the barren land, he heard it, something faint. A low groan. Not the wind, not the shifting sand. It was the sound of pain. He crouched low, scanning the horizon. His eyes caught movement near the rocks. At first, he thought it was another soldier from his own unit, maybe someone who had survived. But as he stepped closer, his stomach tightened. It was not a human. Lying half-hidden between broken stones was a young alien girl. Her skin carried faint patterns that glowed dimly, like embers struggling to stay alive. Her hair was wild, tangled with sand, and her eyes, when they flickered open, burned with the fierce glare of a predator. In her hand was a blade, jagged and sharp, stained with her own blood. She tried to rise, her body trembling, but collapsed back onto the ground with a hiss of pain. The wound in her side was deep, still bleeding. Yet even in her weakness, she looked dangerous. Her kind was known across the stars for their savagery in battle. Entire human squads had been torn apart by warriors like her. The human's heart pounded in his chest. He gripped the small knife he carried, his survival instinct screaming, "Leave her." She was the enemy. If she regained strength, she would kill him without hesitation. Every soldier knew these aliens showed no mercy. And yet, he did not move away. He saw something else in her eyes, hidden beneath the fire and rage, something fragile. Fear. Pain. The faint tremor of someone fighting against death. The desert wind howled, scattering sand across her body. She tried to lift her blade again, weakly aiming it at him, though her arm shook so violently it barely stayed in the air. "Stay away," her cracked voice rasped, though it was more plea than threat. The human stood still. His training told him to finish it quickly, to put her out of her misery. But his heart whispered a different command. He remembered his own comrades who had fallen, left behind in places like this, abandoned to bleed out alone. He remembered the silence of a battlefield after the smoke cleared, how every warrior, human or alien, was the same once their strength was gone, fragile, desperate, clinging to life. He took a slow step forward. Her glowing eyes widened. She pressed the blade closer to her chest, though it slipped from her shaking fingers. Her breath grew shallow, every movement stealing what little life remained. The human knelt beside her, carefully setting down his pack. He pulled out a strip of cloth, torn from his own uniform, stained but strong enough to bind a wound. She snarled weakly, but had no strength left to fight. He moved her hand away from the wound, ignoring her feeble attempt to resist, and pressed the cloth against the bleeding gash. She gasped sharply, her body arching from the pain. For a moment, her hand flew to his wrist as if to break it, but instead of striking him, her fingers just clung there, trembling, until they slid away. Her eyes locked on his, searching for something she had never expected to find, mercy. The human said nothing. He kept working, tightening the cloth, pressing hard to stop the bleeding. Every second felt like a gamble. At any moment she might gather strength and strike him down. But still he stayed, his hand steady. Finally, when the bleeding slowed, he pulled out his last canteen of water. It was nearly empty. He hesitated. His throat burned with thirst. He hadn't had a proper drink in 2 days. But as he looked at her cracked lips, her trembling chest, he sighed and tipped the canteen toward her mouth. A few drops spilled onto her lips. She flinched, then drank. Her eyes softened, just a little. Still sharp, still wild, but no longer filled with pure hatred. She blinked at him, confused, as if unable to understand why he hadn't killed her. The desert around them grew colder as night approached. Shadows stretched across the sand, long and menacing. He knew predators would come out after dark, hunting anything weak. He glanced at her wound, at her barely conscious form. If he left her, she would not last the night. He sighed again, heavier this time. Then he lifted her carefully onto his shoulders. She was light, far lighter than he expected, her strength drained from the wound. She groaned faintly, but did not resist. Step by step, he carried her toward the ruins where he had made his camp. The wasteland swallowed their tracks behind them, as if erasing the choice he had made. Every instinct told him he had just signed his death sentence. But deep inside, another thought whispered, maybe he had saved more than just a life. The night had fallen heavy over the wasteland. The desert was silent except for the low hiss of wind sweeping over the broken stones. The human sat by a dim fire, his body aching from the long trek. Across from him, lying on a blanket of fabric torn from his pack, was the alien girl. Her wound was bound tightly, and her breathing had steadied, but her eyes still glowed faintly, like burning coals refusing to die out. He had carried her all the way here. Every step had been a question. Why? Why risk his own life for someone who might never thank him? Someone who could, at any moment, awaken fully and turn her blade on him? His mind repeated the same answer. Because if I left her there, I'd be no different than the ones who abandoned my own comrades. The fire flickered, casting strange shadows across the ruined walls of his makeshift shelter. He studied her in the glow, cautious but curious. Her kind was feared across the galaxy, tall, strong, ruthless in battle. But here she looked so small. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. Her once tight grip on her blade had loosened. The weapon lay discarded by her side. Without her armor, without her strength, she looked less like an enemy soldier and more like a child, lost and broken. The human's throat burned with thirst. He reached for his canteen, shaking it. Only a few sips remained. He brought it to his lips, then stopped. His eyes drifted to her cracked mouth. Already, he had shared drops of water with her earlier, but it had barely been enough. She needed more. His chest tightened with the weight of the decision. If he drank, he could last another day. If he gave it to her, he might not survive tomorrow. But then again, without water, she would not survive the night. He sat there, staring at the canteen, his thoughts battling in silence. Finally, with a long, heavy sigh, he placed it near her hand. If you wake, he muttered under his breath, then drink. If not, well, at least I tried. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Sleep tugged at him, but he dared not close his eyes completely. He watched her, waiting for some sign, whether of recovery or betrayal. At last, her body stirred. Her glowing eyes cracked open, narrow and sharp, like a beast watching its prey. She saw the canteen. Slowly, painfully, she reached for it. Her trembling hands spilled some of the water, but she managed to sip. The moment the liquid touched her lips, she stopped and stared at him again. Her glare was suspicious, almost accusing. She whispered something in her own tongue, low, guttural, but filled with disbelief. The human did not understand her words, but he understood the look. She was asking, why? He shrugged, keeping his tone calm. Because I could. She stared at him longer, her expression unreadable. Then her strength failed again, and her eyes closed. The canteen slipped from her hands, rolling gently onto the stone floor. The human leaned back against the wall, rubbing his face. Every nerve in his body told him this was madness. He had just given away his last hope for survival to the very enemy sworn to kill his kind. What if she lived long enough to regain her strength? What if she turned on him the moment she was able? He shook his head, whispering to himself, one choice at a time. That's all I can do. The night grew colder. He gathered scraps of fabric and covered her with them. When he tried to rest, his eyes kept returning to her face. The fierce lines of anger were gone now, softened by exhaustion. In the firelight, she looked almost human. Not the ruthless warrior he had been told about, not the monster from the war stories. Just someone broken, clinging to life. Suddenly, a sound split the silence. A distant howl carried on the wind. His body tensed. Predators. The desert was not empty after all. He quickly stoked the fire, throwing scraps of wood and cloth to keep it alive. The warmth and light would keep the creatures away. At least, he hoped so. He reached for his knife, gripping it tight. His eyes flicked to the alien girl. If the beasts attacked, he could not defend both of them. Again, the question returned, louder this time. Why keep her alive? But before his thoughts could answer, she stirred again. Her eyes opened, glowing brighter than before. Her lips parted, and for the first time, she spoke in broken human language. Why, help? Her voice was weak, shaky, but clear enough. The human met her gaze. He felt the weight of the choice heavy in his chest. 100 reasons rushed to his tongue, none of them simple. He thought of revenge, of mercy, of humanity itself. But what he finally said was simple. Because someone should. The silence stretched. She blinked at him, her fierce eyes softening with something that looked almost like confusion. For a moment, she seemed less like an enemy, less like a warrior, and more like someone who wanted to believe in something she had never known, kindness. And as the howls grew louder in the distance, the human realized that his choice had just become even more dangerous. He had chosen not only to save her life, but to tie his fate to hers. The morning sun bled across the wasteland, painting the cracked ground in shades of red and gold. Heat waves shimmered off the stones, and the air carried the dry taste of dust. The human woke with a start, knife already in his hand. He had fallen asleep for only moments at a time, every sound pulling him back to wakefulness. Across from him, the alien girl stirred. Her breathing was steadier now, her chest no longer rising in ragged gasps. The wound in her side was still wrapped with his cloth, the edges stained dark. She was alive. More alive than he had expected. Her glowing eyes opened, catching the sunlight. For a moment, they looked like fire trapped beneath glass. She did not speak, nor did she reach for her blade. She only stared at him. Long silent. Measuring him. The silence stretched between them, heavier than any words. He shifted uncomfortably, breaking the gaze first. He pulled from his pack what little food remained, dried ration cubes, tasteless and hard as stone. He bit into one, forcing it down. Then, after a pause, he slid another piece across the stone floor toward her. She did not take it. She kept staring, suspicion etched into every line of her face. Her kind had been raised to see humans as weak, deceitful, dangerous. Why would one share food, share water, bind the wounds of an enemy? Finally, with trembling fingers, she picked up the ration. She sniffed it, grimaced at the unfamiliar smell, then bit into it. Her sharp teeth cracked it easily, but her expression twisted. She swallowed anyway. The human almost laughed but stopped himself. He remembered this was not trust, it was survival. She ate only because she had no choice. Hours passed in silence. He worked on the shelter, reinforcing it with broken stones to shield them from the wind. She watched him with unblinking eyes. When he looked back, she quickly shifted her gaze away, pretending to study the sand outside. But he saw it, the small changes. The way her posture relaxed slightly. The way her hand no longer rested constantly near her blade. The way her breathing grew calm when he moved closer, as if she no longer expected every touch to be an attack. On the second night, he checked her wound again. She hissed when he touched the cloth, her body tensing like a trapped animal. He paused, waiting. Her glowing eyes locked on his, sharp and threatening. But then, her shoulders dropped. She turned her face away, allowing him to continue. Slowly, carefully, he cleaned the wound with the last drops of water. Her skin shivered at his touch, not from fear, but from something unfamiliar. No one had ever treated her with gentleness. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer sharp, heavy with suspicion. It was softer now, like an unspoken truce. Still fragile. Still ready to shatter. But different. One night, as the fire burned low, the human dozed lightly. The alien girl shifted, pushing herself up with great effort. She moved closer to him, her shadow stretching across his chest. Her hand hovered near his knife. He stirred, opening his eyes to find her inches away. She froze, her glowing gaze locked on him. For a heartbeat, the world was silent. Predator and prey. Enemy and savior. Her fingers brushed the knife's handle, then stopped. Slowly, she pulled her hand back. Instead of taking the weapon, she sat near the fire, her eyes fixed on the flames. The human exhaled, his grip tightening around his blanket. He said nothing. Neither did she. But that night, she did not lie far away. She stayed by the fire until dawn. Over the following days, she began to move more. She tested her strength, leaning on the walls of the ruins, walking slowly. Every time she stumbled, he caught her. She hissed at his touch, but she did not pull away. One evening, as the desert cooled, she did something unexpected. She handed him a small stone, flat, marked with strange glowing lines. He frowned, confused. She gestured to the fire, then placed the stone inside. The lines lit up brighter, releasing heat like a hidden coal. He looked at her, surprised. She had given him something useful, something of her people. It was not a word of thanks, but it was something more important, a sign of recognition. The silence had shifted again. It was no longer enemy silence. It was survival silence. Shared silence. Still, deep inside, the human knew this fragile peace could break with a single word, a single wrong move. She was recovering, and with recovery came strength. Strength that might remember old loyalties. Yet, when he looked at her sitting by the fire, her fierce face softened in the glow, he felt the weight of his earlier choice lighten. Maybe, just maybe, saving her had not been madness after all. But in the distance, under the blood-red sky, shadows moved. Watchers. The desert was not as empty as it seemed. And both human and alien were about to learn that silence never lasts forever. The desert storm rolled in without warning. The sky turned black as if the sun had been swallowed, and the wind howled like 1,000 voices screaming through the wasteland. Sand whipped through the air, cutting visibility to almost nothing. The ruins that had sheltered them rattled under the force, stones tumbling loose from the walls. The human reacted quickly. He shoved his few supplies into a corner, then grabbed the alien girl, pulling her closer to the strongest part of the wall. She resisted at first, her pride flashing in her glowing eyes, but a sharp gust threw her off balance. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, shielding her from the flying sand with his own body. She froze. She had never been touched like this before, not as prey, not as property, not as a patient. She could feel the steady rhythm of his heart against her back, the warmth of his chest against her cold skin. For one terrifying, confusing moment, she did not feel like a warrior at all. She felt fragile. The wind roared louder, nearly tearing the roof apart. Dust filled her throat, and she coughed violently. He pressed the edge of his mask against her mouth, letting her share his filtered air. It was madness. He was giving her the very breath he needed to survive. When she looked up at him, expecting to see calculation or pity, she saw only determination. He wasn't protecting her for gain or advantage. He was protecting her because he chose to. Something cracked inside her. For cycles, she had been taught that humans were weak, selfish, cruel. But this one, this scarred, weary human, was none of those things. He was choosing to bleed for someone who might never repay him. He was choosing to hold on to her when letting go would mean safety. The storm raged for hours. When it finally passed, the ruins were half buried in sand. The human collapsed against the wall, his breath ragged, his face cut by the flying grit. His shoulders slumped as exhaustion finally pulled him down. The alien girl lay beside him, silent. Her wound throbbed, but she ignored it. Her gaze lingered on him as he drifted into shallow sleep. For the first time, her fierce, burning eyes softened. She reached out slowly, hesitating. Her fingers hovered above his hand. Touch, for her kind, had always been a weapon or a command. But now, as her hand brushed against his, it was different. Tentative. Gentle. Her eyes shifted. No longer filled with the fire of hatred or the sharpness of suspicion. Instead, something else flickered there, something she did not recognize. Gratitude. Curiosity. Maybe even the faint, trembling shape of trust. The silence between them was no longer an empty space. It was full of unspoken questions. Why did he risk his life for her? Why did he give her water when he had none left for himself? Why did he treat her as if she mattered? The human stirred in his sleep, mumbling something. She tilted her head, listening. His voice was rough, broken by fatigue, but she caught the word, safe. He had dreamed of safety, for her. Not for himself. The realization struck her harder than any blade. He wanted her safe. Not captured, not destroyed, safe. She looked at him, this fragile creature wrapped in scars and dust, and for the first time, she did not see him as prey. She did not see him as enemy. She saw him as something her people had never prepared her for, a protector. The firelight flickered across her face, softening her features. Her sharp jaw unclenched. Her fierce eyes, once so ready to kill, now carried something tender. It was then she understood, something had shifted inside her. She was no longer the fierce, untouchable warrior who had snarled at him on the battlefield. That part of her was crumbling, replaced by something new. Something frightening and gentle all at once. She leaned back against the stone wall, eyes still locked on him as he slept. Her blade lay on the ground nearby, within easy reach. But she did not touch it. Not tonight. Instead, she wrapped the torn fabric tighter around her wound, breathed slowly, and let her eyes soften further. And in the quiet of the ruined shelter, as the storm's echo faded, the fierce alien girl realized a truth that shook her more than any wound. For the first time in her life, she did not want to fight. The wasteland had its own rhythm. Days were merciless with heat, nights bone-chilling with silence. Yet inside the ruined shelter, a strange calm had taken root. The human repaired cracks in the wall, searched the sands for scraps of metal, and returned each evening with small victories, dry branches for fire, a dented container to store water, fragments of cloth. The alien girl watched him. At first, she watched with suspicion, her glowing eyes following his every move as though searching for betrayal. But as days turned into nights, the look in her eyes began to change. It was not sharp anymore, not the gaze of a predator. It was quieter, curious. One morning, he noticed. She was sitting near the fire, her wound nearly closed, her hands resting idly in her lap. The blade that never left her side was now set aside against the wall. She didn't even flinch when he walked past her to set down food. He slid a ration toward her. She picked it up slowly. Instead of glaring at him with suspicion, she gave the faintest nod. It wasn't much, just a flicker, a tiny movement, but it was enough to make him pause. That nod meant something. As the hours passed, she began following him in small ways. When he built the fire, she added stones around it to shield it from the wind. When he patched the roof, she climbed a little higher to push a slab into place. When he struggled to drag heavy wood, she pressed her shoulder against it, helping. The human never asked. She never explained. Yet with every small gesture, the sharp lines of distance between them grew softer. One night, as the fire warmed the small space, he found her staring at him, not with anger, but with something gentler, almost shy. Her glowing eyes seemed dimmer, softer, like lanterns fading in the dusk. "What?" he asked cautiously, unsure why she was watching him so intently. She tilted her head, as though trying to find the right words in his language. Finally, she whispered, "Not weak." The human blinked. The words were broken, heavy with accent, but clear enough. "Not weak." He let out a small laugh, though there was no mockery in it. "Glad to hear you finally noticed." She frowned, her sharp brows knitting together, but there was no bite in her expression. It almost looked like amusement. The silence that followed was no longer cold. It was comfortable. Warm. Over the next few days, her behavior grew even stranger. She began to sit closer to the fire when he was there. She shared her glowing stone with him every night, placing it near his side so he would be warmer. Once, when he stumbled from exhaustion, she caught his arm to steady him. Her grip was gentle, not the crushing force of a warrior, but careful, almost protective. It unsettled him. This was the same alien who had once glared at him with fire in her eyes, blade ready to strike. Now, she leaned toward him as though she trusted him more than the ruins holding them up. On the seventh night, the desert grew quiet. Too quiet. The howls of predators had not come. The winds did not stir. He lay down by the fire, his body heavy with exhaustion. She was awake, watching the flames dance. When she thought he had fallen asleep, she shifted closer. Carefully, silently, she rested her head against his shoulder. The human stiffened but did not move. His breath caught in his chest. She had not asked, had not spoken, but the gesture said more than words. Her fierce glare was gone. Her body, once tense like a drawn bow, was now soft, relaxed, almost childlike. She let out a small sigh, the kind of sound only someone who finally felt safe could make. In that moment, she was no warrior, no enemy soldier. She was just a girl, tired and wounded, who had finally found comfort. The human stared at the fire, unsure what to do. He could feel the warmth of her against him, hear her steady breathing. His instinct still warned him of danger, but another voice whispered louder, "She's changing." Her people might have called it weakness. He could see it for what it was, something deeper. The fierce alien girl, feared across battlefields, was slowly becoming something softer. Something gentler. He looked down at her, her eyes closed, her sharp features softened in sleep. For the first time, he realized she wasn't just surviving. She was learning. And as her head rested against him, the thought struck him like lightning. She wasn't just recovering from a wound. She was shedding the armor of a warrior and revealing something underneath. Something fragile. Something kind. The fierce alien girl was becoming a gentle kitten. And though the desert outside remained dangerous, inside the shelter, a fragile, unexpected bond had begun to bloom. The desert had grown quieter with each passing night. The human and the alien girl had fallen into a strange rhythm, sharing food, sharing warmth, sometimes even sharing silence that no longer felt heavy. She no longer kept her blade close, and he no longer kept his knife gripped in fear. But peace, in a wasteland, never lasts. It began with a sound. A faint hum carried by the wind, low but steady. The human froze. It wasn't the howl of predators, nor the whisper of sandstorms. It was mechanical, ships. He rushed to the edge of the ruins, scanning the horizon. In the far distance, streaks of light cut through the dusty air. Patrol craft. His heart sank. They weren't his people. The symbols glowing on their hulls were alien, her people. Behind him, the girl stepped forward, her glowing eyes narrowing as she recognized the ships. For a moment, something old flashed across her face. Discipline, loyalty, duty. She had been raised to serve them, to fight for them, to kill his kind for them. The human's grip tightened on his knife. Not at the ships, but at her. Would she betray him now? Would she call out, signal them, deliver him to the ones who wanted him dead? She said nothing. She only stared at the lights growing larger in the sky. Her breathing was sharp, uneven. When the ships landed, the silence shattered. A squad of armored alien soldiers marched across the sands, their weapons gleaming under the crimson light. Their leader's voice echoed through a translator device, harsh and commanding. Target located. Recover the warrior. The girl flinched at the sound. Warrior. That was what they still called her. Not prisoner. Not wounded. Warrior. To them, she was still theirs, still bound by oath and blood. The human stepped back, his chest tight. He whispered quickly, "If you go to them, I'll understand." She turned sharply, her glowing eyes locking on him. Confusion crossed her face, followed by something deeper. He wasn't chaining her. He wasn't begging her. He was giving her a choice. No one in her life had ever done that. The squad advanced, their weapons raised. The leader pointed at the human. "Leave him. He is nothing. Come with us." The girl's breath caught. Every instinct screamed at her to obey. She had been trained since childhood to follow command without question. But when she looked back at the human, standing tall despite the fear in his eyes, her chest ached with something unfamiliar. He had carried her when she could not walk. He had given her water when he had none for himself. He had shielded her from storms and predators. He had never treated her as a weapon, never called her warrior, never demanded obedience. He had only ever seen her as someone worth saving. Her people called her fierce. With him, she had become gentle. The soldiers drew closer, their leader sneering. "Obey, or we will kill him first." Her body trembled. Her glowing eyes blazed brighter than ever, but they weren't filled with hatred for the human. They were filled with rage for the ones who dared to threaten him. She stepped forward, placing herself between the human and the squad. The leader paused, confused. "What are you doing? He is the enemy." Her voice was low, cracked from disuse, but clear. "No." The soldiers raised their weapons. The human's heart pounded, his hand ready on his knife, though he knew it was hopeless against their firepower. He braced for the end. But the alien girl's voice rose, fierce and sharp, echoing across the wasteland. "He is mine." The soldiers hesitated. The words were not the tone of betrayal. They were not ownership. They were protection. The human stared at her, stunned. She stood tall now, no longer the wounded girl he had carried. No longer the fierce warrior bound to her people. She was something new, something in between. The leader snarled. "You've been corrupted. Step aside." Her blade was in her hand now, steady and strong. She growled, louder this time, "No." The air thickened with tension. The human could barely breathe. One move, and the desert would become their grave. But as he looked at her, standing in front of him, her body a shield, her glowing eyes filled with fire not against him but for him, he realized something. The shift in her eyes was complete. She no longer saw him as enemy. She saw him as worth protecting. And for the first time, the human felt he was not standing alone. The desert air was thick with silence. Dust swirled between the ruined stones as the alien soldiers tightened their formation. Their weapons glowed, aimed at the human's chest. Any second, a single order could end him. But the alien girl stood in front of him, blade raised, her body tense like a bowstring pulled to breaking point. Her people stared in disbelief. She was supposed to return to them. She was supposed to be a warrior, loyal and fierce. Instead, she was shielding a human, a fragile enemy, a stranger. The leader's voice rang out again, harsh and metallic through his translator. "Step aside. You have forgotten who you are. You are one of us, not one of them." Her chest heaved as she drew in a slow breath. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her eyes, glowing brighter than ever, flicked to the human behind her. His expression was calm, steady, though fear trembled just beneath the surface. She remembered the storm, when he had given her his air instead of keeping it for himself. She remembered the nights he had shared his last drops of water, the way he had bound her wound without expecting anything in return. She remembered the silence by the fire, the first time she had felt safe. And she remembered the moment her own eyes had shifted, when she no longer saw him as prey. The girl turned back to her people, her voice steady but sharp. "I am not yours." The words cracked the desert like thunder. The soldiers stirred uneasily, their grips tightening on their weapons. The leader snarled. "You are a warrior. You were born for battle. This human has poisoned you." She lifted her blade, holding it high. "He healed me. You left me. Tell me, which one is poison?" The soldiers hesitated. Doubt flickered in their stances. For the first time, her words cut deeper than their orders. The leader barked, "Enough! Kill the human. Seize her if she resists." The squad raised their weapons as one. The human's heart slammed in his chest. He gripped his small knife, knowing it was useless, but refusing to stand idle. Then she moved. Like lightning, she lunged forward. Her blade flashed, knocking aside the nearest weapon. Sparks lit the air as she struck with the precision of a trained warrior, but her movements carried something new, fury born not from duty, but from choice. The human stumbled back, watching in shock. She wasn't fighting for glory, nor for command. She was fighting for him. The desert erupted in chaos. Soldiers fired, beams cutting the air, but she was faster, her body twisting, blocking, striking. The human joined where he could, throwing stones, distracting enemies, even tackling one soldier to the sand. Together, in the madness, they survived. When the dust cleared, only the leader remained, his weapons still trained on the human. The alien girl stood, her blade pressed against the leader's throat. Her eyes burned with fire, but her voice was low, calm, certain. "No more." The leader's lip curled. "You would betray your own people for him." She glanced at the human, her eyes softening. Then she looked back at the leader. Not betrayal. Choice. For the first time in her life, she wasn't obeying. She wasn't following orders. She was deciding who she wanted to stand with. She pushed the leader back, forcing him to retreat. The soldiers, wounded and shaken, dragged their commander toward the waiting ships. His final words echoed across the desert. "You are no warrior anymore. You are lost." The girl didn't flinch. She lowered her blade, her shoulders trembling, not from fear, but from release. The ships lifted off, vanishing into the sky. Silence returned to the wasteland. The human stood, dust covering his face, cuts lining his arms. He looked at her, still catching his breath. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She turned to him, her fierce eyes soft once more. "I wanted to." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a universe. She stepped closer, her blade sliding back into its sheath. Slowly, cautiously, she reached for his hand. Her fingers brushed his, hesitant, almost shy. Then, with a small squeeze, she held it. For the first time since the day they had met, the human felt the tension leave his chest. For the first time, she smiled, not wide, not bold, but small and real. The fierce alien girl, once feared across battlefields, had become something else entirely. Not weak, not broken, not lost, but gentle. And as the two of them stood together under the crimson sky, the desert no longer felt like a wasteland. It felt like a beginning,